This is Mike Veny, and I had the honor of hanging with my friend Jeff Yalden for Thanksgiving and his wonderful family. And it's the day after Thanksgiving, and we are sitting outside on his back porch talking about life, and I had some questions for Jeff. And one of the things I wanted to ask Jeff is, we are both mental health speakers. We both have our own mental health challenges that we deal with. And one of the questions I know that we both get is, how do you keep it together when you have to go to work or go to school, but you're battling depression, anxiety, and all this stuff, and have to deal with people? So that's what I would like to know, how Jeff Yalden deals with that.
I think that's a great question. I think you and I both have that issue. And I think it's also a great question for other speakers that might be dealing with mental illness themselves and also wanting to get into it. We can't show up to the client and say, you know, I had some triggers that affected me emotionally. I am just not as present. You know, what are they going to say? Oh, okay, just do the best you can. Whereas I think on the other hand, we can use a trigger that affected us in our story to relate with the audience. The bottom line is simply this. We might deal with mental illness, yet we still have a responsibility to be professional. And so one of the things that I do before every talk, I stop, I pray, like before I get out of the car. And it's not, listen, I don't want to make this about your higher power, but whatever your higher power is, you might just be praying to center yourself in the responsibility that you have. So the way I do it is I'll just sit in the car for like 5 minutes and I'll just inhale peace, exhale love, inhale peace, exhale love. Whatever I might be dealing with, I want to kind of push that out the windows of the car. I want to get centered with what I have to do, and I want to make sure that I'm present and engaged in that moment to give my heart to my audience. So, yeah, we all have issues that we deal with, but regardless, you have to learn effective tools to say, I can deal with this later, but I have a responsibility right now. Very similar to when we're talking to our audience that might be dealing with mental illness, you have to learn to breathe, to take inventory and accountability, own it, but you also have to learn to pick up and put one foot in front of the other. And I also call it, you know, brush your teeth, wash your face, do your dance, walk out the door, and make the best of the day.
Great answer. I love that. And the cool thing about being a speaker, and I was just thinking about this, is when we're on that stage, it's kind of a controlled environment because we're on the stage and the audience is out there. But I wanted to ask you this, Jeff. Pretending now I am a high school student or a middle school student who doesn't have the luxury of being the speaker, but just has to go into school every single day and deal with people, maybe people that are bullying me or people that I don't like, or teachers that trigger me, and I'm battling my own mental health issues and I'm just trying to hold it together. What advice would you have for me?
Yeah, I think that's an awesome question. And you hear that more and more and more with social media, with cell phones, and like you can have 5 or 6 friends together and they're not talking, and you're thinking like, why aren't they talking? But the reality is they are talking, they're texting each other, yet they're still in the same presence. And so I think one of the big issues with young people today is coping skills, problem solving skills. And so a lot of our kids come and they're just not very comfortable in this eye contact, in the first impression, so to speak. One of the things that I really try and tell kids, I'm okay with social media, texting, cell phones. However, before that is that priority in your life in the way you communicate, you still need to make sure that you're good with this eye contact. The yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, thank you, please, you're welcome, excuse me. That I don't think will ever change. Furthermore, to answer your question about if you come to school and you're just dealing with so many emotions, I think mental illness is the greatest healthcare crisis of our time, right now.
Agreed.
I also think in the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to see mindfulness practice, you're going to see meditating and breathing come into our schools. I think it's going to be a class, it's going to be an elective class you can take. I think it's going to be very much part of our corporate world. I want to encourage young people to start self-care earlier, like maybe get up 15 minutes earlier a day, or learn to take a time out for 2 or 3 minutes in between classes so you can put your phone down, you can just be present, inhale peace, exhale love. You have to control your emotions. The real world is not going to be, okay, I understand you're having a moment, go take a half hour. No, you have to take responsibility. You have to control your emotions. And I think part of that, breathing, mindfulness. 3 things I say to young people every single day. Number 1, I think young people need 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep a night. I think that's really important. Number 2, I think nutrition plays a significant role. One of the things that contributes to depression is sugar. And young people are eating or drinking 200 grams more sugar a day than they should be, so that all of a sudden you feel lethargic, you're tired, you're exhausted, you got to do something, it's affecting you. Number 3, put down your social media devices and phones a little bit. 60% of our teenagers today that do not take an hour a day to get outside, to get exercises, to get involved, are more than twice as likely to consider taking their lives than young people that are exercising regularly. So I want to say, learn to put down your device a little bit, get involved in school clubs, extracurricular activities, go for a walk. I think those 3 things alone will play a significant role. But in short, really to answer your question, work on yourself every day. Bring your anxiety down. I know we all have fears, but on the other side of fear is self-esteem. Because you look back and you say, you know what, it was hard, I did it.
Loved Jeff's answer there. I love self-care. It's something that we both have in common. We talk about being intentional about self-care. It's not something that is a normal thing in our culture for whatever reason. And one thing that I've talked to Jeff about, we were actually talking about this last night at Thanksgiving, is the difference between self-care activities and escape activities. I personally consider escape activities things like social media or acting out through drinking or things like that. And it's important to be aware that there's a difference between real self-care and escape activities. But for some young people, and I recently had this happen, and I'm so glad I get this moment to ask Jeff about this. I had a young person that I was talking to about the importance of self-care, and he didn't think it really applied to him. He was so deep in his own challenges with depression and some issues that he's going through, he didn't believe that it applied to him. So what would you say to someone who you've told about all these wonderful things, who still at some level doesn't believe that it applies to them?
Another awesome question. When you talk about escape activities, I kind of come from the standpoint that, are they escape activities to free yourself, or are they escape activities because you want to avoid something? Whereas I like the term self-care, because I'm going to take care of myself in a time frame that I allot for myself to go out and own the day rather than let the day own me or my emotions. And then you ask the simple question about, some people think that this doesn't apply to me. I don't need self-care. Listen, when you're young, you don't know what you don't know. So we could be talking about mental illness and major depression, but for a teenager, major depression to them could be that situation that happened in the moment. And as you and I are mature and we understand, the littlest thing happens for young people, but it's not little to them. It's the end of the world. So I want to say, for someone that doesn't think this applies to them, self-care, I think, really applies to everybody. You have maybe mental illness you're dealing with, or you have anxiety, you have family stresses, you have these high expectations, going to college, you're dealing with family drama, you're dealing with this big exam, finals coming up, your senior college applications. So self-care can apply to all of that, because you can learn to, instead of your anxiety being an 8 out of 10, with 10 being the highest, practicing self-care, you can just breathe, you can just visualize, you can just have these affirmations that when you are done, you're like, I'm ready to own this day. I'm ready to be responsible. I'm ready to tackle these projects or tasks I have. And if you don't have self-care, you're really going about your day at 6, 7, 8 out of a 10 with your anxiety level, versus if you did self-care and you were intent on lowering your anxiety, how productive are you 6, 7, 8 versus 1, 2, or 3? That's why I think self-care, it's called exercise. Self-care is just putting down your phone and just taking a minute to be present, thinking about what you have to do. Self-care is as simple as having a to-do list, rewriting it, crossing out, here's what I have to do. Self-care is from as simple can be to as deep or as complicated as you want to make it. But self-care, I think, is something that will benefit everybody, whether you have mental illness or you don't.
Another great answer from Jeff. I love what he said, that you don't know what you don't know. And I want to say this, we are both friends, we talk a lot, and one of the great things about our friendship is that we've been able to candidly discuss with each other different discoveries that we have. And even as adults, you're still working on yourself. It's a never-ending process. You're still learning and discovering. And that's why I always say, instead of talking about mental health recovery, I think I learned this from Michael Weitzman, talk about discovery about yourself. One thing I want to ask Jeff is, I've also met youth who come to me and say they've practiced self-care. They've done all these things. They're constantly exercising or working on their nutrition and journaling and all this stuff. But no matter what, it feels like things are getting worse and worse, and they feel hopeless. And in my opinion, that's one of the paths that lead someone to choose to end their own life, or think about choosing to end their own life. So, Jeff, what would you say to a youth who is practicing self-care, is talking about it, but no matter what, feels like things are just getting worse and worse and worse, and they're losing hope?
That's a very deep question. And before I answer it, I want to make sure I do the responsible thing. I think when you're practicing self-care, one, it could be exercise, great. If you're practicing self-care and it's emotionally starting to get the best of you, that's when I think you're really growing at that point. It will get worse sometimes before it gets better. But I think what's important is you're starting to own it, you're starting to accept it, you're starting to embrace it and acknowledge it, and you're asking deeper questions. You're going deep within yourself. That I call losing the ego and opening the heart. At that point, I think those might be some red flags for you to say, maybe I need to talk to someone, a mental health professional. Maybe I need to go talk to a trusted adult, a teacher, a guidance counselor, my parents or something, because there are certain things that you might not be able to quite understand. But to have a professional help you go deeper and have like cognitive behavioral therapy, you can start to learn to think differently, take the necessary action, have tools to be able to overcome it. So number one, I want to make sure that you're doing the responsible thing by asking for help. I think that's, always, if worse gets to worse, call 911. But I want to really acknowledge that part, that if you're doing that self-care, like if you're just like breathing, and I know if you do that, sometimes like emotionally it can hit you. Recognize that this is not a bad thing. You are essentially looking in the mirror and looking at who you are more than how you look. And I think if we all spend more time looking at who we are, how we look takes care of itself. So that's a good thing.
So that about wraps up our interview here. I hope you learned something about self-care. It's important for everyone. It really, really is. And I just want to say this. I actually wrote an article for Health Central titled How to Practice Self-Care Without Feeling Selfish. And in my article, I found a study that said that of people with chronic health conditions, only 5% practice self-care. So statistically in my mind, that's zero. It's a phrase we throw around all the time, but hardly anyone is doing. And it's really, really important to help youth, to help teens, to help the world become a better place if people just start intentionally investing in themselves. So thank you so much for listening in. Jeff, do you have any parting words?
Yeah, lastly, I just want to say self-care is not selfish. I think in order for us, like you and I as professionals, remember this, you can't pour from an empty pitcher. So you got to fill yourself up in relationships before you can emotionally be present for other people. So practice self-care and you'll notice your life change.